What's up, guys? Hope you're all doing well. Today, I wanted to talk about what I consider to be the scariest monster in the entire Godzilla franchise. This is what we know about the genetic hybrid abomination from 1989 known as Biollante. A mixture of human, plant, and mutant dinosaur DNA, this monster is notable for being one of the only creatures in the Godzilla franchise that the King of the Monsters has to look up at. With an appearance that can only be described as something of a sickly-looking amalgamation of plant matter, sharp teeth, and a giant blob-like body, this creation is extremely unsettling. When compared to most other Godzilla opponents, it's usually just another guy in a rubber suit, but there's no human-looking legs on this beast, and no giant-sized arms either. Instead, what you get is this terrible mixture of genetic material that shrieks in a shrill, painful sounding scream while slithering its way towards Godzilla during their fights. If you took this thing out of the movie and put it in literally anything else as a formidable monster, it would be instantly iconic without having to rely on the Godzilla brand. Biollante's first and so far only live-action appearance happens to be in the second film of Godzilla's Heisei series. This movie helped establish the second continuity of the Japanese films and moved everything in a much more bizarre direction. Essentially, the plot of Godzilla vs. Biollante happens to be that of an upset scientist grieving the loss of his dead daughter. Twisting what moral laws and ethical boundaries may exist, the man actually combines her DNA with that of a special rose, but the plot thickens when Godzilla's own cells get thrown into the mix. Which, come to think of it, this movie's plot actually sounds like a much more extreme version of what Steven Spielberg and Colin Trevorrow put together with Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Anyways, the look of Biollante has always been iconic, with the monster starting off as just this intimidatingly large stalk of a rose, before evolving into a mutant blob with elongated tentacle mounts and a giant head with multiple layers of teeth that resemble a crocodilian or dinosaur. Biollante in this movie dwarfs Godzilla in size, and the way it's depicted to the audience is always that of some kind of grotesque scientific creation that towers above the King of the Monsters in some pretty intense scenes. Now, what some of you may not know is the fact that the practical effects used to create the beast weren't always going to be the sole way that Toho would bring the creature to life. Oddly enough, test footage exists of a battle between Godzilla and the new monster's tentacles in stop motion, which hadn't been used in a Godzilla movie since the 1954 original. Now, none of this stuff got used, but the footage that they created for the film is honestly really cool, and it has a certain 80s charm to it that reminds me of something like the puppet from A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, or the Dream Warriors that you may all know about. Of course, it's not as realistic as the practical effects they used to create it in the final version of the movie, but come on, this is Godzilla. Realism isn't exactly at the top of the list, especially back then. Now, as far as the monster itself, the reason I think this design is so scary comes down to the way the filmmakers went about making it come to life. Just like Orga, Biollante is one of the monsters that I actually own an official Toho special effects book on, and in its pages, the monster is described as being carried on a rail when the creature was supposed to move. Action would be controlled by special work using 28 wires, which happened to be the most Toho had ever used at the time. Instead of simply lumbering around on two legs like most Godzilla opponents did, this thing actually moves in a very eerie alien sort of way, and when its jaws open to spit a special acid attack, you know you're in for something you haven't seen before. It's kind of crazy to compare this to other films at the time, even something like Hellraiser, which was a Western production. That giant monster thing they had on a rail looked really bad in comparison to Biollante, so don't count the Japanese Godzilla films out all the time when it comes to special effects. Yes, they're known for being a little more low budget, but I'm telling you guys, stuff like this is really impressive and extremely scary when you just look at the imagery they've created for the film. There's a couple of times the monster comes close to putting Godzilla in its mouth in a similar way Orga did 10 years later in Godzilla 2000, but while that monster happened to be much more successful in that particular feat, Biollante is by far scarier and way more interesting of a design in my own opinion. I'll never forget seeing this VHS for sale at a Walmart around 1997. The front having a cool, mysterious look at what the monster was up against, with Godzilla going towards an alien-looking rows. It took me a really long time to actually sit down and watch the movie, and while I will say the final product is nowhere near the scariest Godzilla film ever made, this monster has a lot of potential to be featured in some sort of comeback that they could produce later on down the line. But hey, those are all just my own thoughts on the subject matter. What do you guys think of Biollante, and what is your pick for the scariest Godzilla monster design in the series? Personally, this thing is just too gnarly looking for me not to pick. But hey, whatever your own thoughts and opinions happen to be, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below.